Welcome to Election Connection. My name is Michael and this is April. We have some election news to cover on this episode. The California Secretary of State held their annual Ballot Bowl.
What is a Ballot Bowl?
A competition that the Secretary of State holds each year between participating colleges to see who can get the most students to register to vote. Congratulations to Stanford University for winning the 2022 California University and College Ballot Bowl, leading up to the 2022 general election. We applaud one of our Santa Clara County universities, Stanford, for their efforts in registering 1,046 students to vote.
The runner-up was UC Los Angeles, who registered 817 students, and coming in third was UC Santa Barbara, who registered 779 students. Judging by the very close numbers, it's difficult to predict who will be the winner of the College Ballot Bowl in 2023. UCLA has always been on the leaderboard, and I'm thinking next year they might have a good chance with being number one. Under the category for most creative approach to register students to vote, we have representing California community colleges was College of the Canyons, CSU Channel Islands, UC Berkeley, and Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities, we have California College of the Arts. Civic and Voter Empowerment Action Plans, as required by the Student Civic and Voter Empowerment Act, were used to determine the winners and the most creative approach to register students to vote category. College of the Canyons had many creative approaches, such as vote sign painting, led by an LA artist on campus, LA County Sheriff candidates meet and greet, Student Civic Empowerment Summit, collaborations with the LA County Registrar Recorder, Engage the Vote, a program that enrolled student action team members in 1 unit of internship credit, implementing links to online voter registration on their main homepage, campus-wide communication via flyers, emails, press releases, presentations, and reminders of voter-related deadlines, voter registration tables at student clubs, organizations, and student government, organized an English as a second language student panel on the importance of taking part in participatory democracy, in-person candidate forums, I Vote Because campaign, collecting narratives to compile into a digital Zine. I have to say, this is a robust and inspiring civic and voter empowerment action plan. Kudos to the College of the Canyons team. Michael, would you like to introduce our special guests?
Thank you, April. Allow me to introduce the champions of the Ballot Bowl representing Stanford University, Cameron Lang, Lexi Cooper, and Isabel Anzabi. Thank you so much for joining us. For clarification, y'all are part of a student-run nonprofit organization called Stanford Votes. Can you tell us more about your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stanford Votes is completely student-run, although we do receive funding and some sort of advising and support from adults at Stanford. It was founded a few years ago in response to really persistently low voter registration and voter turnout numbers at Stanford, and it's made a tremendous difference in that context, as our Ballot Bowl victory, I think, really indicates.
What were your creative approaches?
So Stanford Votes' primary approach to fostering civic engagement at Stanford is we focus a little bit less on these one-off initiatives that reach 10 or 15 students. We do bring in speakers to have events about voting. We do set up tables in highly trafficked areas of campus to register students, but we try to really put the bulk of our time and resources into these broader institutional reforms that sort of result in lasting structural change at Stanford and compel, hopefully, thousands of students to register to vote or to turn out on election day. So one example of those initiatives, one of the most exciting things to come out of Stanford Votes in recent years, is what we call the Civic Engagement Enrollment Hold. So every fall, every Stanford student, in order to register for their classes, has to acknowledge, like on the course enrollment portal, the university's recommendation that they register to vote.
Wow.
This reform has made an enormous difference in Stanford's registration numbers because we're basically forcing everyone to stare at our online voter registration tool, which just makes it so much easier for them to take the 5 seconds to actually type in their information and register. Um, Another example of a big institutional reform to come out of Stanford Votes is Election Day holiday. We call it Democracy Day at Stanford, which I think is kind of, fun and alliterative, but we don't have classes on Election Day every year.
Oh,
So
wow.
I
Wow.
think that has also been really important in conveying the message that civic participation is something Stanford valorizes. It's something we should take time to do and take time to think about.
Yeah, something we also did this past election cycle was we created a sort of partnership with one of the really popular cafes on campus, Coupa Cafe, where the first 5 or 10 students that stopped by during Democracy Day and showed the register their proof of civic engagement could get a free mug from the coffee shop, which was a fun little incentive. And then besides these kinds of events and reforms, we also work on creating a lot of voter resources coming out of Stanford Votes. So one big project that we created during the fall was a 50-state Stanford student voting guide so that students who don't have the time or energy to parse through their various state agency websites and kind of try to determine what is the deadline for when I need to register? What does my state say about if I need to get a mail ballot? What kinds of ID do I need for that? What kinds of signature requirements are there? We kind of created a centralized guide so that students could just search for their state and quickly have all in one place information about every deadline and requirement that applied to them, including like logistical things that might pose additional obstacles like postage requirements, notary requirements, and other things like that. So we also focus on creating educational resources since we know that college students are busy and might be dissuaded from going through that entire registration and participation process if they have to put in that extra work that we're willing to do for them.
Yeah, and a way that we have spread our voter registration guide is through the use of various social media, since a majority of our students are very active on Instagram and other social media platforms. So we've done this really cool campaign which we've done in the past, which is called 50 States in 50 Days, give or take the exact amount of days. But we basically would do posts fairly consistently with student spotlights that would feature a Stanford student who's from a particular state that would have a voter registration deadline coming up. And it would have updates regarding when you need to order your absentee ballot by, and when it needs to be received, and then also the individual requirements like notaries, signatures, etc. on these little posts. And then a really cool feature about it is that we would include quotes from each of the students about why they think voting is so important and the value that civic engagement has in their lives. So we would have these posts and we'd be very consistent with them. And then in addition, we'd also do other, regular updates on our Instagram stories about upcoming election deadlines, just to make sure students are constantly reminded about when they need to submit things by. So that way, having an excuse of just forgetting, isn't as applicable. So we really tried to do the most we could to remind students about when they needed to do things by and if they wanted to be civically engaged.
Wow, thank you for that information. That's really, really inspiring. It seems like y'all cast a wide net of creative approaches in the way you get people to vote. Thank you for that info. Did you run into any roadblocks during this campaign?
I think the biggest roadblock is just the vast differences in voting timeline and requirements for students who come from different states. It makes it really challenging to have clear mass communication about how to vote when each state is so different. Some states require that a notary sign your absentee ballot. Every state has a different deadline by which you have to request your ballot and different rules for how to navigate that request process. And so I do really envy the student voting organizers at public schools where, some 80% of the student body is voting in the state where the school is located, and they can just say, this is the date by which you need to request an absentee ballot, or this is the date you need to show up to vote. And our messaging needs to be a lot more complicated. To that end, we really did try to lift as many of these barriers as possible and to disseminate information where we could. I think the 50 state guide that Lexi mentioned was really instrumental. We also compiled a list of notaries around campus and publicized that list to make that process easier for people from states where your ballot needs to be notarized. We bought a ton of stamps and envelopes and ensured that there were free stamps and envelopes in every dorm to try to sort of lift that maybe prohibitive cost barrier to requesting an absentee ballot. But I think that varying state requirements is still an obstacle that Stanford Votes needs to think about how to overcome. And I felt very disheartened. There were some students who reached out on Democracy Day itself, and they were like, hey, I'm from Alaska. I'm so excited to vote. It's Democracy Day. How do I do it? And it's terrible to tell people that they've missed the deadline for their home state. But yeah, I think it poses an interesting and exciting challenge for us to consider going forward.
Yeah, and adding on to that, I also think something we learned is that some of the most effective ways that we found we were able to answer student-specific questions about their state guidelines was posting a poll on our Instagram story and having students anonymously submit a question that they had about where do I go to get a notary signature, or what does it mean if my state says that my ballot needs to be returned on this date but sent on a different date. So I think focusing on meeting students where they're at rather than hoping that your approaches will do the trick is also an important thing to realize. And like Cameron said, some of our most effective strategies were just walking around campus and distributing stamps to various residences, and making these resources very easily accessible, which isn't always the first strategy that you think of, but are small steps in the process that can be overlooked, but that might pose very significant barriers to students.
I would pose also in addition, this is kind of a lot more of a minor kind of a thing, but a lot of times so many of the resources we publish are on our website and then also our Instagram account. But to a certain extent, I feel like we put so much effort into adding all these resources onto these tools, but sometimes, if a student doesn't follow the account, I feel like they won't be getting as, adequate updates about their state's elections and all of these deadlines that are coming up. So if someone isn't actively, I would say, pursuing to learn more about their state's deadlines, it's hard for us, I would say, to reach them. So I think we're trying to, really promote a culture of civic engagement on campus. So I think we just have to find, different ways of also disseminating this besides mailing lists, and different, accounts that Stanford Votes has a holdover.
Is there anything else that y'all would like to add? I think we're about to wrap up.
I don't think so. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about our work. It does in the moment feel a little bit thankless, like toiling away, working out some kink in the enrollment hold or negotiating how to get stamps into this particular dorm. So it's really exciting to have the opportunity to talk about it and to sort of celebrate the real impact that this work has.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in staying updated with us, feel free to visit our website, stanfordvotes.org. We're also on Instagram at Stanford Votes and always open to any like communications or partnerships with other communities that are looking to work towards similar objectives.
Well, Cameron, Lexi, and Isabel, thank you so much for joining us today. Hearing your experiences, it's very inspiring, and it's actually refreshing, especially for me and myself working in the elections department. And yeah, y'all brought a lot of insight for sure, and I think you will all inspire all the students and voters in general. And congratulations on winning the Ballot Bowl. We are definitely excited to see how creative and innovative colleges, and especially Stanford, will be for the 2023 Ballot Bowl, especially leading up to a presidential election. Thanks again for all the insight and inspiration and all your creative endeavors with civic engagement. Thank you for joining us.
Remember, voting is not only about voting for president. You'll also be able to vote on local measures and candidates, which are just as important. And if you think your vote doesn't matter, just last year, we had a candidate race that was decided by a tie vote. We've reached the end of our show. My name is April, and this is Michael. And with that, we hope you elect to connect. Thanks for tuning in. Good job, guys.
Just in time.
Cool.